Hi, this is Autodidact, and today I am going to show you how to use Laravel starting with root. But before we dig into the basic practical details of Laravel, let me first tell you of what exactly happens when a request comes in. When a request comes in, the routes file handles the URI matching and loads the necessary controller that corresponds to that URI or URL. The controller then delegates to load all the information necessary to provide a response. And when everything has loaded, the view comes into the scene and receives the data from the controller, and then generates the HTML structure for the end user. So here we have a request for a home page, and in response, Laravel loads a view right here. Now let me show you how that really works by going through its backend. On Laravel's root directory, you'll find routes folder, and within this folder, there's a web.php. If you open this file, you'll see that inline documentation that says web routes. This is where you register all your routes for your application. Now notice that a route class with a get method is being called here. It simply says, route this get request, and execute this closure function here, which in response returns the view called welcome. And if you look at here on the listed folders, there's one called resources. Views are stored in here. So there it is. This is the file that contains the HTML structure that has been loaded after a request is routed. Let's try to update this Laravel text here to show you that this file really is the one that has been loaded. I'll change this to autodidact space, save it, and reload or refresh this page. There you go. Now let's try to add another route for a different request. I'll go ahead and just copy the existing route here. This time, if the user visits profile, we will return a string autodidact space instead of the view method that loads the HTML template. This is to let you know that you can return basically any form of data to the requesting client. And by any form of data, I mean a string, a number, and you can even send an array of data, and Laravel will automatically convert it to JSON. Now let's switch back to the browser and update the URL in the address bar here. So in the backend, we've registered the profile URI request. So we type here /profile and hit enter. As you can see, the pure string autodidact space has been returned or loaded without any HTML template. Let's go back to the backend. So for example, if you return an array here and back to the browser, do a reload, Laravel will automatically convert that to JSON. And that's very useful, especially when you start working with API, Ajax, or Axios. Now let's register a new route and also a new view. So route. When a user gets a new request to my page, in response, we will load a closure here where we return a view. Let's call this a test. Now if we get back to the browser and visit my page, you'll get an exception. That's because Laravel cannot find the test view. So I'll switch back and go to the views directory. As you can see, we don't have that test view here yet, so I'll go ahead and create a view file here. This should be named test.blade.php. Now take note that all view files should be PHP files, meaning the file extension should be .php. And Laravel is using Blade template, so you're also going to have to append .blade on the name of the file before the .php extension, in this case, test.blade.php. So now, I'll open the existing welcome view here and just copy a block of HTML so I don't need to manually write it myself. And now paste it here on the new view file and edit or remove a few tags. And I'll say, welcome seeker of knowledge, and save it. Alright, let's go over it one last time. So when a user makes GET request, through this endpoint in the browser, in response, I want to load the view that we've just created called test. And here it is. So if we switch back to our browser and give this a reload, you'll see, welcome seeker of knowledge. When developing a web application, there are cases that you need to pass data through the query string. So here is an example of a query string. Now in Laravel, you can fetch this data from the URI using the request helper function. I'll switch back to my code editor and write something like this. We call the request function and provide the key. This key here should match whatever name you used on the query string, in this case, last name. Next is to verify that this request helper function will retrieve the value of that certain key we're looking for. We know already that we can return any form of data here, so why don't we try to return this variable here directly from this root? Save it and reload my browser here. And there you go. I'm confident enough that you get the idea there. Now this time, let's try to pass that data to the view. To do that, simply return the view function here with the view name and add a set of array as second parameter or argument of the view function. So here I'll add surname as the key of the element and assign the variable we've created as the value, so any key within this array will be available in the view. Now let's open the view file here. So remember that any key within that array we pass from the root is accessible as a variable within the view. To render a variable in the view, all you have to do is surround your variable in 2 curly braces, and automatically this will compile down and escape any unnecessary characters like HTML tags and symbols. So if you want Laravel to ignore escaping any characters, like in some cases you want to render a block of HTML that you assign to your variable, all you have to do is to surround your variable in a pair of curly braces and in a double exclamation mark. So now if you're using this, Blade will skip its cleaning job in your string and just render whatever is in the variable. This is insecure, so be extra careful when using the latter. So all that is being catered by Laravel's templating engine, which is the Blade. We will discuss more about Blade in the future episodes of this Laravel series, so hold tight because this is going to be a long ride. In some cases, you would want to register a root that accepts a wildcard value. For example here, let's say you want to accept any job title value from the URI without using a query string. Now this job title here could be any value, it could be developer, it could be engineer, dentist, or anything. So in this case, we can use what we call a wildcard. And it's something like this. You just have to enclose your wildcard name with a close and open curly braces. Now in response, we will return a view, and I've created one called job. So now if we're going to visit jobs/anything, sure enough the job view will be loaded. Now the question is, how do you fetch that value? Back to the root, well, we named it title. So let's pass it here as an argument of the closure, naming it as title. You can name the variable argument here whatever name you want. It doesn't have to be the same as the wildcard name. Now let's pass that title variable into our view. And I'll name the key here as job_title. And within our view, we will echo or render the variable job_title here. Like so. And back to the browser, we'll give it a reload. And there you go. So once again, since this is a wildcard in our root, then this should accept anything. So if you're changing the value here to anything, that should work just fine. Now let's give this a twist. Say we've pulled a data from a database. And this array here should be rendered to our view by job title. And finally, we pass the array jobs here with the key that we've grabbed from the URI. So, if come back here in our browser and key in Web Developer, there you go. Now let's try the other one. Sure enough, the value in our array is rendered. But aren't you curious what will happen if we key in one that doesn't exist? Let's do that now. I'll go ahead and change this to Data Analyst. And bang! An exception has been thrown because obviously that index or key doesn't exist in our array here. Now let's do a quick edit here. I'll say, if this index is not set, meaning somebody is requesting with the wrong key, or that key doesn't exist, then we will return a 404 not found page. And Laravel has this helper function called abort. And all you have to do is key the 404 error code as its parameter or argument, like so. So now if I come back here and reload, we get Laravel's 404 page. Instead of defining all of your request handling logic as closures in your root files, just like what we currently have here, you may wish to organize this behavior using controller classes. Controllers can group related request handling logic into a single class. For example, a user controller class might handle all incoming requests related to users, including showing, creating, updating, and deleting users. By default, controllers are stored in the app/http/controllers directory. So in our route here, instead of using this block of closure, we will completely remove and replace this with a controller. I'll go ahead and cut these lines inside this closure and remove this unnamed function here. Then replace with a controller. Let's say job controller. And on this controller, we'll invoke the showTitle method. And this is how you define a route to the controller method. So when an incoming request matches the specified route URI like the one that we have here, the showTitle method on the job controller class will be invoked, and the route parameters will be passed to the method. So obviously we don't have that controller yet, so let's create one. There are two ways to create a controller in Laravel. One is by going through its default directory, which is app/http/controllers. And right here, let's create a file. I'll name it as job controller. As you can see here, there are lines of codes already in here, auto-generated by my code editor. And now we have the job controller class here. And within this controller, I'll add the showTitle method. And I'll just paste the lines of code we've copied earlier from the closure function. So now whatever parameters we passed from the previous closure function can be accessed here in our showTitle method. So previously we named it as title. But like I said, it doesn't really have to be the same with the wildword name you used in your router, so let's name this as job title. So if I switch back to my browser and give it a reload, it works, just like it did in the previous scenario. So that would be one way of creating a controller. Another way to create a controller is by using a generator. Let me show you how to do that. But let's delete the job controller first that we've manually created, just so we can start from scratch. But before that, let me copy the showTitle method so we can reuse this later. There's a command line interface included with Laravel, and it's called Artisan. It exists at the root of the application. This provides a number of helpful commands that can assist us while we build our application. Now to view a list of all available Artisan commands, just use the list command. So I'll type here php artisan list. So remember that this command we just typed here will only work when you are in the root directory of your application. So now I'll hit enter to execute it, and bang. Now you're seeing lots of commands here. It can be a little overwhelming at first, but remember you'll learn it one at a time, when and if you need to. So now if we scroll up, you'll see this make section here. All these commands here will generate files. A single short command will generate a file or files automatically. And that can save you time instead of doing it manually. So one of those is called make controller. So now we type php artisan make controller. And then your desired name of controller. Mine here is job controller. And there we go. A job controller has been generated automatically. How awesome is that, right? So now if I'll paste the method we've copied earlier, then we get the exact same thing. So in the next episode, let's talk about how we can incorporate the database to our application.